Hey, thanks for watching. My name is Jan de Wit. I'm also here presenting on behalf of Arold, Brandse, Emiel, Krahmer and Paul Vogt. We're all from Tilburg University in the Netherlands. And I'm here to talk about human-like gestures for social robots in the context of second language learning. But before we go into the current study, I would like to take you back to 2018, HRI in Chicago, where we presented kind of a first study that led to the current study, in which we had children aged 4 to 6 years old, native Dutch children, interact with a humanoid robot in the context of a game of I Spy with My Little Eye. So in Dutch, the native language, the robot would call out I spy with my little eye, followed by an English word that we wanted children to learn. And in this case, there were 6 English animal names included. So then the child would have to find the matching image to this word on the tablet screen and tap it to answer this round of I Spy with My Little Eye correctly. And we played 30 of these rounds. And children in this study were split in 2 groups. One received iconic gestures from the robot. And these iconic gestures were related to the concepts they had to answer on the tablet. And the other group did not receive these gestures. And the gestures looked a bit like this one for horse. So we saw that if the robot would use these gestures to support its teaching activities, we saw that children learn more, and that they also resulted in a higher level of engagement with this interaction while learning these words with the robot. So we followed up on this study in 2019 with a larger scale study in which we didn't use the game of I Spy with My Little Eye, but we had kind of an overarching storyline where children would have to perform all kinds of tasks on these virtual 3D scenarios, like in this case the zoo, where the animals had escaped from their cages and they would have to be brought back to their cage. And we used these kinds of scenarios to teach children words like add, take away, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the gestures in this case looked a bit like this. This is the gesture for add. And we noticed in this case that there was no effect of these iconic gestures on learning gains. So I created a small overview comparing these 2 studies. We see that the second one, the 2019 one, is of larger scale. The target group was a little bit more narrow, so we only included 5-year-old children. It was a long-term study, so we had 7 sessions rather than the 1 interaction with the robot. And this interaction was also more complex, so you would have to drag and drop objects on the tablet screen, repeat after the robot. And of course, since there were more sessions, we also had more words included. But moreover, these words were a bit more abstract. So these were things like next to, more, jumping, add, compared to these very concrete animal names that we used previously. This also resulted in gestures that were a bit more exaggerated in the first study. So you see here also the robot is standing, so it's able to use its entire body to perform these gestures. While in the second study, the gestures were a bit smaller. The robot was sitting more in a peer-like fashion, close to the child. So it was more limited in performing these gestures. So to follow up on this, we decided to kind of replicate this first study, but using a bit more complex words from the second study. Also, what we noticed in the meantime was that if you look at human gesturing behavior, there is some variation there. So as a very concrete example, you see that people perform gestures, for example, for the word pencil, from the character viewpoint. So you actually become the object, you become the pencil. But you can also do this from the observer viewpoint. And this is something, the character viewpoint is more of a childlike way of performing these gestures. It's bigger, it's actually more becoming the object. While the observer viewpoint is something that we as adults tend to do. So you're trying to take this outsider looking in point of view. For example, by showing that a pencil is a cylindrical small thing, followed by the act of writing with this pencil. So we see that there is some variation there. So in the present study, first of all, we wanted to replicate what we saw in 2018. So we went back to basics with the game of I Spy with My Little Eye. But instead we included a more diverse group of target words. So not only animal names, but also some things like bridge or stairs that are maybe a bit more complex and also harder to find gestures for. So we included the 3 conditions. Based on the previous study, we wanted to again compare between a robot that performs gestures and one that doesn't. But we also included a condition in which the robot performed different gestures for the same concept to see if it helps if the robot uses these different strategies and different focuses on different aspects of the concept. And all of these gestures were taken from a data set of human performed examples that we recorded last year. So I'm going to give you an example for the word stairs. You see that there are some variations in the way people in our data set perform gestures for the word stairs. So this was outlining the shape of the stairs. This is still kind of showing off from this observer viewpoint what stairs look like. Now we move more towards the character viewpoint, where you see a person actually climbing a ladder, which is kind of comparative to stair climbing. And also actually walking upstairs, but at the same time indicating that it's something that's high up. And finally, this is again kind of from the observer viewpoint, showing that stairs go up and that they are big and high. So if we look at the results, we see that children learn in all conditions, and this is consistent with our previous work where we showed that by training these words with a robot, children learn new words. So on average, they learned a little bit more than one new word measured immediately after the interaction. If you measure again 1 week later, they know a bit more. So they learn on average 1.4 new words in English. However, we don't see any significant differences between the conditions with and without gestures. So we do see that gestures lead to more engagement. That's also consistent with what we saw in 2018. We divided this into task engagement and robot engagement. And we measured this by taking small clips from the interaction at round 4 and round 24 of the game of I Spy With My Little Eye. And you see that, as can be expected, the engagement drops as you go. So it's a very repetitive game. It gets quite boring. So you see that children get bored with this and they lose engagement. So that's normal. But if you look at robot engagement, you also see that overall the average engagement through time is higher if the robot uses gestures. Whether this is repeating the same gesture or using variation, that doesn't really matter. It's higher in both. So because we see that people of different ages have different strategies when it comes to gesturing, we also looked whether there's an effect of age. And indeed, you do see that there is an effect of age when it comes to using gestures to learn English words. So what we did here was we plotted the age in months at the time of the experiment against their performance on the different post-tests. So this is the immediate post-test, and this is the delayed post-test. And we took the difference score. So we subtracted between the delayed post-test or the immediate post-test and the pre-test scores. So this is learning progress, basically. That's why you can also have negative values here. And what you see here, and this pattern becomes especially apparent in the delayed post-test, is that children who were in the conditions where the robot used gestures, if they were older, they seem to benefit from these gestures. So this is the no gesture condition. You see that the ones that receive gestures perform better, whereas the younger children in our sample seem to have even a detrimental effect of these gestures. So you see that they score lower than the no gesture condition. And this effect of age is significant, but only for the gesture condition. So the slope of this line without gestures is not significant. So to conclude, we see that gestures do appear to work, but only for the older children in our study. The younger children, they have some problems with the gestures, and we're not sure yet exactly what the cause is. But we think they either might not understand the gestures yet, they need to develop this skill, or they struggle with the fact that it's a robot and not a human performing them, or maybe there is some sort of cognitive overload of having to learn a second language while at the same time observing these gestures and taking advantage of them. We also realize that it's useful to now revisit previous studies with the knowledge we have now. So for example, this effect of age. So we did do that, and we do see the same effect only for the gesture conditions in our previous study in 2019 and also in 2018. So also there, the older children benefited from gestures more than the younger ones. So when it comes to variation, we didn't see any additional benefits compared to repetition of gestures. However, we're very curious to see if this maybe affects the perception of the robot. So if you have a robot that varies its behavior more, maybe it's perceived as more likable or more human-like than one that doesn't. But that's very hard to investigate with children of 4 to 6 years old. So we propose to run a similar study with either older children or adults to see whether the perception of the robot is maybe different if it moves around more and if it actually introduces variation. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and I hope to see you soon.